beer, it's good for you.
Hello and welcome to the video. Within this video we'll be looking at bottling your homebrewed beer so that it will stay fresh for as long as possible. Sadly there is much nonsense spoken about this topic. Often you will hear that beer can last in a bottle for either up to 1 year or up to 3 years can also commonly come up. However, I will be opening and taste testing 3 beers that are much older than 3 years old in fact. The youngest is over 5 years old and the oldest is over 7.5 years old. But before we dive into those tastings, let's get some backing knowledge behind us so that we can fully understand the simple routes to bottling success and what you can expect. So let's get straight into it. It should be understood that beer can go stale much faster if exposed to oxygen after fermentation. To safeguard against this, you can use CO2 flushing of oxygen and also prevent splashing during transfer. It's really that simple. Naturally, when commercial breweries transfer into bottles, this is all handled in mass production with very technical and expensive equipment. However, on a homebrew level, equipment like Kegland's wrapped can and bottle filler, shown here on the left, and also the Nucotap counter-pressure bottle filler, shown here on the right, are good budget-friendly investments, especially if you mostly bottle or can your beer, as they both allow CO2 flushing and easy transfer from the bottom of the bottle to avoid splashing automatically. It should also be mentioned that naturally cleanliness and sanitation is vital, as this also prevents beer being spoilt by avoiding contamination. So it is vitally important that your bottles are both clean and sanitary before filling. The sanitary step is a key part to do as close to the bottling time as possible to fully minimise risk. Furthermore, hops also preserve with their antimicrobial presence that suppresses microorganisms that can lead to spoilage too. The more hops used, the better the effect. It is also important to realise that there are also volatile ingredients that will also have an impact on a beer's life. Wheat beers, for example, will not last very long due to the wheat proteins that will break down and then drop out, which will then lead to the beer becoming watery and as such tasteless. The most suitable beer styles for aging are actually strong beers, let's say over 10% ABV, and sour beers. In these cases the alcohol in a strong beer acts as a preservative. In the case of sour beers that do not contain fruit, you can enjoy a very prolonged life due to their acidity, acting to preserve them and the fact that the living cultures within a sour beer will scavenge oxygen. As I'm sure you now realise, this topic is really a simple one, and bottling of beers of any sort is not something to fear, it is simply something to do with the correct knowledge. So let's start our testing and tasting with a beer that was bottled in January 2018 that was featured in the early days of my channel, known as Superfast Imperial Stout. Shown on screen is the title screen of the video on YouTube. This beer has an ABV of 11.3% and was fermented using Vosk Farm Quake that is multi-strain. At the point of filming and this tasting, this beer was actually over 7.5 years old. The purpose of this brew and subsequent video was to show how fast an Imperial Stout could be turned around using Quake, which is not only fast for fermentation but also at conditioning. Usually I would wait at least 6 months, but usually 12 months before serving Imperial Stout of this type, but due to the Quake it was tasting very nice within 6 weeks. This recipe does feature a small amount of wheat in fact, however in past taste tests small amounts have not had any negative consequences in my experience. I have held back some bottles from this batch and have been gradually having them year by year, so let's see how this very last one has fared after over 7.5 years in the bottle. So here we go, let's get this one opened. There was a reassuring nice hiss when I opened this one, as you can see we have some carbonation. This beer has the classic Imperial Stout pure black body with a nice tan head. Here is a quick close-up so you can more easily see how pretty this one is. Okay, it is now time to dive in. Firstly I checked the aroma, and looking at my previous notes this one is still on point by still having dark malt, coffee and chocolate on the nose without any detectable alcohol notes. The taste test also went very well. I can tell you straight away that this one has done exceptionally well after 7.5 years in the bottle. It's still got that rich chocolate and coffee flavour profile along with a silky texture. It is certainly a shame that this is the last bottle. It's at times like this that I really wish that I could actually bottle more than I do these days, as I mostly keg, as it's just so easy, and naturally beers will last a prolonged time this way, but they are simply not going to taste as good as a 7.5-year-old stout, and naturally this one had a lot of help early on from the Quake. The next beer for testing is my Belgian Quadruple beer, which was bottled in January 2019 and shared on YouTube the same month. Shown on screen is the title screen to this video. This quad, also known as a Dark Strong, has an ABV of 13.3%, and if you look back on the comments section of the video, you will see some very positive feedback from viewers that also brewed it. This video has a full recipe writing guide for Belgian Quadruple Style too, which you may also find interesting. I have 3 750ml bottles of this one left, including the one that you see here that I'm going to taste. These are really intended for sharing with visitors, not to be drunk solo, but I managed all the same. This beer was also bottled in a simple fashion with no CO2 flushing, and I used a bottling bucket with batch prime sugar. For easy transfer, I simply attached a bottling wand to the bottling bucket's tap and filled from these from the bottom. However, sadly some of these bottles did not have very good carbonation or no carbonation at all, but they still tasted very good. So let's see how this one has got on after 6.5 years in the bottle. For a beer like this, it always feels right to serve these into a Belgian beer goblet style glass, which is not only suitable for the style, but brings a nice level of occasion to the tasting. Unfortunately, this one has no carbonation. I suspect that this is due to the champagne yeast that I use not being so healthy as it should have been. This is one issue that can happen to anyone with yeast, of course. It is just a pity that it had to affect a beer like this one. Here is a closer look for you and a warning that if you are bottling beers and relying on yeast to carbonate, that this is naturally not always going to give you reliable results, as you only know the life that it has had once it arrived with you. These days I prefer to carbonate in a keg and then bottle for this reason. Let's now dive in with an aroma check and then a tasting. This beer, except for obviously the carbonation, simply ticks all boxes in all areas. The aroma is still on point, and like experience with my previous tastings, it's still a very rich and flavourful beer, yet very nicely improved compared to when I first started sampling bottles of it. The last beer here represents somewhat of a disappointment, at least at the start of its life anyway. It was actually a recipe shared on my channel from March 2020 that I developed over years for a black IPA that really had a great taste and flavour, but when it came to brew it at a higher volume I used a new brewing system at the time, which had various problems that still needed to be ironed out. This was not covered in the recipe video shown on screen, but in a separate content video at the time. Sadly, this really compromised this batch to the point where it tasted more like a stout than a black IPA due to the big issues with temperature during the brew at all stages. However, I do like stout, so I decided to keep the bottles, and over time have enjoyed trying them as time has allowed the beer to develop into something different and somewhat interesting. This beer has an ABV of 7.5%, so it's not a strong one as such, but it does have plenty of hop content that I strongly suspect has helped keep it for longer. Like with the other bottles, this beer was bottled in a very simple fashion. It has been quite some time since I tried the last one, so let's see how it is now over 5 years later. When I opened the bottle there was a nice audible hiss, and during the pour it was clear to see that this one has reasonable carbonation. Let's take a closer look. This one is jet black on the body with a nice white head, as you can see. So let's now move in for the aroma and then taste test. All of the IPA element of this beer is completely lost, and I suspect that would have largely been the case over 5 years anyway, no matter what, but this remains to be actually very enjoyable. It's a bit like a light stout, though maybe I'm just saying that because the first two were high ABV and had much thicker textures. No matter its history, this somewhat rejected beer has turned into something very enjoyable with very nice malt and new caramel flavour arrays that has developed more and more over time that I find to be very pleasing for my taste palate. I believe that it is fair to say that if a beer does not meet your wishes or expectations early on, and as long as it isn't contaminated, then it is actually a wasted opportunity with many beer styles to not keep hold of the bottles and simply wait it out. Even the most odd-tasting beer at first can turn out to be something well worth drinking and enjoyable. This one certainly went from a disastrous start into a very satisfying finish. Do let myself and the community know what you think about this video and its content. It would also be great to hear from others about their experiences of sampling beers that have been long in the bottle. I do hope that you found this video useful, informative and interesting. If so, why not consider liking and subscribing? For further support you can join the channel's Facebook group, and if you would like to support the channel then check out the channel's merchandise store, as all profits go back into the channel. Until next time, happy brewing!